All right, and we're back on the road. It is Monday, September the 10th. And today's topic is going to be teenage life and high school. So, before I get into it, I do want to talk about a few things that came up from yesterday. Well, not yesterday, from the previous podcast that I did, Introduction and Childhood. So, I did get a question, and it was a good question. It was a loaded question, and it is a subject I want to look more into. And the question was along the lines of, do I think adultery should be prosecuted? And it's a very loaded question, like I had said, and I answered it to the best of my ability in a text format. Eventually I'm going to make a video about it, or a podcast episode about it, I guess. So the next thing, actually, I don't want to disclose that right now, so I'm going to take it back. I'll probably say it at the end of the episode once we end the high school phase, because there's something important that happens at the end of the high school phase. So, but there's one thing I need to say, definitely, before we get started here, is these are my own personal stories, and they're here for my reference, and hopefully for the reference of somebody who's looking for some advice, or just, I guess, mistake avoidance. But in the case of being psychologically abused as a child, there's really no avoidance of that. Whoever is your parent, you're pretty much stuck with them. So you just gotta, I guess, do your time and then get out. Because we did have plenty of encounters with Child Protective Services. Well, okay, not specifically Child Protective Services, but counseling for children, and like the teachers were concerned at one point, and it showed that we weren't necessarily doing spectacularly great at home. Hang on, I'm just gonna take a pause here. All right, we're taking off again. So, I felt as a kid that I had some sort of responsibility to somewhat like protect, I guess, the family, to not try to split it apart. So I never really made like a huge fuss about my discontent with the relationship with the family, really. I kind of just like played along. I just went with it. So for the big majority of my childhood, I just didn't say anything, which I think in part is why my mother thought that she was doing a good job when she really wasn't, was that I just never said anything. But yeah, she definitely was not. And I get a lot of the whole, oh, well, I gave you life argument. I get a lot of that fallacy, you know, the manipulation tactic. And she is a manipulator, and that's what she's good at. She's not very good at anything else. So she drives home what she's good at, which is manipulation. So I was attacked for it. I was attacked for my previous podcast, but like I said, this is my personal experience, and if someone wants to go ahead and discount it and make up whatever they want to make up, if they want to make up their own story, sure, go ahead. I mean, there's nothing I can do to stop you. But this is how I experienced it, and that's how it is. I mean, it's not like you can tell me that I don't know who my mother is. I've been relatively aware of her existence for the past 28 years, so if anything, I know her pretty damn well, as opposed to somebody who's known her for like 2 or 3 years. So I'm going to leave that there, and I'm going to continue on to teenage years in high school. So I was very much of a keep to myself kid. I didn't do too well with socializing. And I think a big reason for that was just that my family sucked. I really do think that's a big reason why I had a lot of issues making friends, keeping friends, expressing myself socially when I was a child, is just because, one, I didn't know how, because nobody had taught me, and two, all I knew was that people were assholes. Really, that's all I knew. So I didn't really want to get involved with anybody, so I just kept to myself, and I was the weird kid. And of course, Rose was completely fucking terrible. Okay, we're gonna take that piece off. Let me just make a sound here. Boop! Of course, my mother was completely terrible at choosing my clothes, and that too, I was getting the cheapest clothes possible. I wasn't even getting like decent clothing. It was like cheap clothing, and it was embarrassing because it was the worst fashion choices you could make. And I hadn't gotten new clothes, but by the time I got into 8th grade, I hadn't gotten new clothes, so everything was starting to not fit. And I remember a lot of the times I was wearing high waters, and I was made fun of because of the whole high waters thing. And then I ended up going to high school, and I guess socially I started picking up after freshman year. I integrated with, friends. I had friends. I had a little group of six guys. We were not, stellar, but we weren't the bottom of the bucket per se. And I think it was sophomore year where I got involved in the yearbook class / journalism. And at this point, I was already involved with photography. It wasn't the first time I had seen a camera. I started out with the little disposable Kodak cameras, and I had seen the Polaroid shake pictures, the instant pictures before, and I did have a really big interest in photography. And in this journalism class / yearbook, it turns out that nobody was picking up the slack on photography. So I ended up being the only student to be doing photography for the yearbook that year, aside from the teacher himself, because he was doing it too, but I was directly assisting to that. And it was a really neat job for me, because it really let me observe those around me better. I wasn't necessarily becoming part of the groups that I was observing, but it did give me a good idea of how people would socialize. And it also made me feel important, because now I had a purpose and people wanted me, in the sense that I was there to take their picture, and it was in their best interest to, keep me around, so that come yearbook pictures time, I would be easily available. And I got to shoot at, school events, like sports, the pep rallies. I got to do little story hit pieces because I was doing a little bit of journalism for the class, but primarily my job was the photography, which was where I got my first taste of a DSLR, was in that class. And I loved it, and it was what really pushed me into photography as a serious amateur hobby. Because before that, it had just been like just interest, and not really having the equipment or having the knowledge. It was just like point and shoot. It wasn't really advanced. There was no real technique to it. After that point is when I decided this is what I need to learn, and this is what makes me happy. But also at the same time, during sophomore year, they announced that the school was getting an ROTC program, junior ROTC program. And it was sponsored by the Marine Corps. The first set of instructors was a retired lieutenant colonel and a retired sergeant major. And I said, sure, why not? I want to try this. I've always been interested in the military. At that point, I was already interested in the military. And I think that mostly comes from Halo. Halo really is, the heroes of Halo. Not per se Master Chief. Master Chief is the primary protagonist, but all the background heroes are Marines. The Marine Corps is a big element of the game Halo, which was huge in 2003 when it came out. So I was heavily influenced by that game to have, how would you say it, a leaning towards the military. So when I heard this program was coming to the high school, I was kind of excited, and I immediately jumped to the opportunity. So, first year went great, and there was some complications with the program, in the sense that because San Diego is such a, I guess, left-leaning Democrat area, like progressives, sort of like hippie bullshit, they started protesting the program actively, and the parents were joining into the protests, and the other students started joining into the protests, and then all of a sudden, it was the JROTC program versus, 100 people and kids that were against guns, that were against the military, and they would obviously over-exaggerate what the program was there to do. Because normally what would happen is, we had a sort of rank structure. We had a rank structure. It was like a pseudo Marine Corps rank structure where you had enlisted and you had officers, but it was all still just basically playing Eagle Scouts, Boy Scouts, because, you know, all the ranks were fake. They were, it was like chevrons and rockers, but in the middle it was a little lamp, like a lamp of learning. And the officers' ranks were these little circle dots that were shiny. And, you know, that was it. You either had one dot, or you had two dots, or you had three dots, four dots. It wasn't exact replicas of what the military ranks would be, but they were there. And they didn't really mean too much, because of course we were kids. I mean, what are you really going to do with a rank when you're all kids? So we would do physical training, which was just it was a better organized version of the PE class, because it did give us group cohesion. You know, we had like this team. We had a team that we were pushing for, instead of PE class where it's just everyone to themselves, and as long as you move around a little bit, you get credit for the class. In JROTC, you would actually all feel unified, and we would go on runs, and we would do, you know, our dynamic warm-ups, and it was fun. It was fun, and, you know, we wouldn't really make fun of each other because we were a team. You know, it didn't matter if you were, you know, the skinny, bony guy or the really overweight kid. We were all one team, and that's what it was about. And there was another aspect of it. There was two more, and these were extracurriculars directly tied to the JROTC program. So one of them was the drill platoon, which was exactly what it sounds. It's drill, and you do marching, and you do drill movements, and you do it for competition. And I guess I forgot to mention is that during the standard class, we would also do drill, and it would coordinate us, and it would force us to work together, and, you know, one of us would get some leadership experience out of it. And it would make us, you know, spend some time. You know, the second extracurricular activity was the marksmanship team. And this is where a lot of these protesters got the whole, we don't want the Marine Corps teaching our kids to shoot guns. So, the marksmanship team was completely voluntary. It was not part of the class. You had to have your parents sign off on it. You know, it was completely supervised at all times. We were using Daisy air rifles, which is basically a little bit stronger version of a BB gun. You know, like, you know, you shoot your eye out sort of deal. So you would shoot at paper targets about maybe 15, 20 feet away, which would be no more than 20 yards. So these things are not that strong. Yes, the basic concepts are about the same to when you go shoot the rifle, a real rifle. However, I would argue that teaching us how to properly use an air rifle and treating it as if it was a live weapon was far better, because it would already condition us to handle firearms safely. You had your weapon conditions, you had the safety rules, and they all applied at all times. And if you were found to be violating these rules, you were removed. And if you continued violating these rules, you were completely kicked off the program. So it's not like we were teaching, the program was teaching, these kids to go and kill with guns. That's not what it was about. And it was also not about indoctrinating kids into the Marine Corps. That's not what it was about. And I did it for 3 years, from sophomore to senior, and not once did I really think, I 100% have to do this. I 100% have to join the Marine Corps. Didn't think of that once. And any decision I made came out of my own will. It wasn't a requirement for me to continue year by year. But I did it anyways because it was something I enjoyed. So, I guess just a little side bonus, I guess dating life in high school. My dating life in high school was terrible. Terrible. I had 2 girlfriends, neither of which were really my choice. I remember one of them, it was the first one, she took my phone out of my pocket in printing class, which we had a printing shop class, with real printers, like press printing, like what you would print newspapers on. So I got to learn that. But anyways, she stole my phone out of my pocket, took my phone number out of my phone, and then put my phone back in. And then later on in the day, after school, she gave me a call and then, asked me if I wanted to be her boyfriend. And I said, sure. And then from there, we went maybe 3 months. And it was dumb because I guess she just wanted it to be like an appearance thing. And I was going with it. And that's about it. I was terrible at dating. And I'm going to blame that one on my home life again, because I never got any sort of advice. I never got any sort of direction. I just kind of I was just left to fend for my own. And it's a terrible position to be in, because I didn't have friends that were really into dating, and my parents never said anything, and my brothers were too young, so they wouldn't have known. So I didn't gather much experience, and it was for the worst. It was really for the worst, because I would have been very thankful to have made my mistakes early, to have learned the hard lessons early. And I'm obviously not talking about, getting a girl pregnant. You don't want to get there, but I wish I would have at least gone through some heartbreaks in high school. High school was all right. High school was fun at times, but there was no sexual awakening, I guess. That was just It's the potato, for lack of better words. That's was a sack of potatoes. And I don't consider myself to be, hideous. I think on a good day, under the right light, I'm like an 8. And of course, if I'm wearing a suit, I can maybe hit a 9. But, okay, I'll dial it back. Maybe an 8.2, because I'm 5'8". And I know there's a lot of girls out there looking for like 6'2". And that's the thing. A lot of people say, oh, you're short. But I'm average. I think I'm average. I'm 5'8". I mean, that's not too short. That's pretty good. Enough of that. So, by the end of high school, I was so burned out with the system. I was your typical rebel against the system. I said, I'm tired of this crap. I'm learning things I'm never going to use. I don't want any of it. I renounced my opportunity to go to college. I'm going to drop it. And I'm going to go join the Marine Corps at 17. I wasn't even 18 yet. So, I graduated. And a month later, I was being shipped out to boot camp at San Diego MCRD, which was about 10 minutes from my house at the time. So it was right in my backyard. And that seems like a good place to stop, because I feel like boot camp in itself can be its own story. And it has hundreds of stories for plenty of people. Boot camp is something that follows a veteran to the grave, basically, because it's not something you can forget easily. It's a big life change. It's a big decision. And I will say that I do not regret having gone to boot camp at 17. Do not regret it. I may have not gotten exactly what I wanted as a primary job, but I learned so much from going to boot camp and becoming a part of the Marine Corps community that I almost think that it made up for having an uneducated, shitty social childhood. Like, everything that I could have been taught as a child was in the Marine Corps. So, my last thing I'm going to say is, I got a question as to why I'm doing this podcast, and why I'm doing it now, like specifically now. So, this year, I finally got out of the Marine Corps, and I feel like for the longest time, I've been keeping in a lot of stories and a lot of bad stuff. I've done plenty of counseling, plenty of therapy, plenty of thinking, and I've never really gotten to put it out there. And I've really wanted to put it out there. And I keep telling myself that I'm going to write a book. But the truth is that right now I don't have time to write a book, because now I'm a civilian and I gotta work every single day, So writing a book isn't really in the cards right now. Unless, of course, I want to quit my job and then be a starving artist for 5-6 months while I write the book, and then another 6 months before I get published, and hopefully make some scraps out of the book. So I'm not willing to do that right now. I'm just going to keep working my day job, and this podcast in a way is going to be my way of fulfilling this wish to make a book, or write a book. But eventually I'll get to writing a book, as things settle down, as this move to this new house comes to a close, and everything settles. I could maybe start writing 3-4 pages a day for the weekends. So as for right now, expect podcasts for days to come. I'm going to be doing them Monday through Friday on my drives home. So they'll be up, later at night. 8 p.m. Eastern time is when I expect for WOOF Radio to have a new episode. And I keep forgetting to plug that in. So I'm Alex, your host here on WOOF Radio. And that's WOOF Radio. Thank you for joining, and hope you join us tomorrow.